This week's reading, Encoding and Decoding by Stuart Hall, basically argued that there is no real linear path for communication. Like, it doesn't just go from sender directly to receiver, and it does not always communicate the exact message it was intended from sender to receiver because the path is not linear. And so the first quote that I picked to talk about reads, it's found on page 5, and it reads, "The lack of fit between the codes has a great deal to do with the structural differences of relation and position between broadcasters and audiences, but it also has something to do with the asymmetry between the codes of source and receiver at the moment of transformation into and out of the discursive form." And so basically this quote I thought was pretty significant because it directly addresses the lack of fit between codes of senders versus receivers. And so basically he's talking about how if we have a sender and a receiver that are two different people, they're two different people, they have many differences. They could be from different cultures, they could be from different maybe countries, they maybe know different languages. One grew up in the city versus one grew up in like the country in the rural areas. Just so much different background knowledge and like past like background experiences contributes and like influences how someone goes to like interpret and understand a message. And so basically the asymmetry between the codes of source and receiver just points out that like you as a sender cannot rely on the fact that what you're saying makes sense to you, so therefore the receiver is going to receive it in the exact way that it was intended. There will likely be some sort of misunderstanding, because it could not be a misunderstanding, but maybe just a difference in interpretation, and they receive the message maybe in a different light, or pertaining to something different that they can relate to. And I just thought that was powerful to basically acknowledge how different people will receive messages differently based on different experiences and things like that. So yeah, and then the second quote that I wanted to talk about was on page 6, and it reads, "Since the visual discourse translates a three-dimensional world into two-dimensional planes, it cannot, of course, be the referent or concept it signifies. The dog in the film can bark, but it cannot bite." And so this was like my favorite quote that I found throughout the whole text. And basically, I just thought it was like a very good example of like trying to visualize what Hall was talking about throughout this text. And so this specific example is talking about visual discourse, which would be like movies, TV shows, and things like that. And basically, it's just acknowledging the fact that like these TV shows are able to play out, many different moments that are parallel to reality, and like it's representing like real life situations. But that since it is quite literally a message of its own, it's staged, it's not real life. It can never be what the sign is trying to signify. It can only be the signifier, it can only be the representation. So yeah, like the dog in the film, it can bark, but it cannot bite. There's no way for it to physically bite someone, for the message to physically bite anyone. But like the message can represent a dog biting someone. So yeah. I thought that was a good quote to use as well. Like all in all, I would say I agree with Hall. There is no linear path of communication just because there's so many different factors. And so with that, the question that I was left with was like, is there really a best way to ensure that the message a sender is trying to communicate is going to be received by the audience in its intended way? We know all this information about limitations of like discursive language and codes, and how culture plays a role into codes, and like who understands what codes. Is there like a scientific way that we can figure out the best way to communicate to masses? Or is it more so just up to like chance and fate? Like it just depends on that day if the audience is willing to think deeper, or think maybe in the same headspace that the sender was in to receive the message in its intended way. Or, if it's up to fate that day and the audience just wasn't there that day to receive the message in its intended way. So yeah, I feel like I'm kind of leaning towards like it might just be, maybe it's like a combination of both. Like it's kind of up to fate, but also like you can use specific tactics to try and relate to and appeal to specific audiences that they receive your message.